Hi, welcome back to the Coda podcast. I'm Ollie Flower.
And I'm Roger Harris.
Here's a podcast from our Coda 22 event, which I think we really feel was our best content yet. It was our best event yet, and it was so good to see everyone back together again after such a long hiatus, right?
So good. It was friggin' awesome to be back together. So much to be proud of. Agree. Maybe our best content ever. And how about having a Climate Active or Australian Government Climate Active certified carbon neutral event? That's a first.
It was one hell of an achievement there.
Massive achievement. And there'll be lots more on the website that you can track down about how we did that.
So please go to the website, check out the other podcasts and video content, the YouTube channel, and you can find us wherever you get your podcasts. And do share it with your network, tag us on socials and spread the word, because this is the last Coda event and it's been one hell of a ride. So thank you for everybody who's been part of it.
Yeah, an absolute privilege to have been part of it. For more on the sort of winding up of Coda, check out on the website, and hope to see you all soon.
See ya.
Thank you. And welcome to the next session, Know Your Patient. We're kind of taking a sharp angle turn, I guess, from the last session, which was very much about the biggest issue that's facing us all. So this session really is about the smallest unit, the clinical individual patient. My name is Michelle Johnston. I am like an erstwhile emergency physician from Perth and a writer and a hardened veteran of the SMAC world. We've got an incredible panel here. This session has been amazingly curated by the Coda group to marry up the smallest of questions about our individual patients with some of the bigger issues which face our patients, because you all know this current axiom, which is you can't manage a patient until you understand an individual patient's story or their narrative. But I wonder if you can truly understand that patient's narrative until you understand the greater social context. And as an aside, I take kind of a little bit of umbrage with the term social determinants of health. I think we could more plausibly call them political determinants of health. But aside from that we'll move on. And we're going to, I'd like to just introduce you to firstly to our Twitter moderator, the Texan down the end there. I'd really love you to pose questions. Because you don't want me, no one wants me asking the questions. And you also, we're going to move away from the whole guy down the back with a mic who's been practicing his Shakespearean soliloquy about his own experience in the area and not asking a question at all. So can I please ask you to pose Twitter questions to Justin using the hashtag Coda22. You don't need to use his handle. And he promises me he's going to collate them all. We're going to have questions at the end. But to start off this session, we're actually, strangely for me, going to have a hybrid tech session. Our first speaker is Dr. Daniel Nour. He had unavoidable commitments, and I've only just discovered that she's to blame because he's actually working on Gemma's ward today. So he couldn't be here. But Daniel Nour, we're very honoured. I had a conversation with him over the internet last week. He is a basic physician trainee with the Northern Sydney local health service. But he is with us remotely today because of his role as Director of Streetside Medics, New South Wales. And he was instrumental in its startup, and due to its success, he was awarded the 2022 Young Australian of the Year. So we're going to start by playing a brief ABC clip, just goes for a few minutes, and then move straight into the conversation that we had. So thank you.
Just driving at the moment to one of our clinics. All of our clinics are a GP-run medical service, which goes to 4 different sites across New South Wales. and we collaborate with already existing food services or shelters, and we provide our service free of charge to anyone that's coming to that food service or anyone that needs us. It took everything within my life for at least a few years. And for me, it was difficult. I will not shy away from the fact that it was a very tough journey, but I feel like it was my responsibility. I felt like I knew that I could do it. I had the support around me to make it happen, and it would have been a shame and it would have been a misjustice if I didn't do it. So when we come to the clinics, generally we're all greeted by name. We start to know these patients, they start to know us. How are you, Aaron? Good man. That's become part of the beauty of it. We really have become part of the fabric of the community and part of the sort of the culture of being here. We've got about 6 or 7 people waiting to see some of the doctors. Some are coming back for their results, but most of them are new patients who we haven't seen before. Many of them are coming back for things like cream, so some of them need specialist cream which they're unable to afford, so we get it for them. We've only been here for 10 minutes and we're pretty inundated with patients that need our help.
Someone with his rich array of talents that also cares that much, that's pretty special. I think he's a young man with a very strong social conscience, and he's seen a societal need. He's a genuine role model for so many. What we've been witnessing here tonight, it's not right. That offends his notion of the way the world should be.
We have the best healthcare system in the world, but there are barriers that limit access to healthcare. There are people that I've seen living on the streets who have wounds that are going unmanaged, who have diabetes going unmanaged, who have cancers that have been untreated for years. And it worries me that so many of these people are dying on the streets because they're not able to access services. And not everything is a success story, and it's not all glamorous, but at least there's a service that's there and that it's available to them in a place where they want to be. And the onus isn't on them to come to us. We will continue to go to them.
I feel like he's coming to the community with a genuine sense of help. He's very warm, engaging, sincere and authentic.
I truly believe that in life we all have passions and we all have interests that we never chose, really they chose us. And I think it's our obligation to listen to that and to actually act on that. I've always told myself if you can help just one person then it's worth it. And tonight there was a few people that I think we made a remarkable difference on. And so no matter how tired we are, at least speaking personally, I love it.
Look what he's done to address this really profound need that so many of us have seen forever. That's the truly inspirational thing I think about Daniel, is that he doesn't walk past it.
So, Daniel, via the wizardry of technology and the internet, our Coda audience have already been introduced to you, and I've also seen the brief ABC clip, which means we can just jump straight into a conversation. But it also does mean that you've got a bit of a hard act to follow. You've got to follow yourself. So good luck with that. To start off with, maybe would you be able to just maybe lay a few foundational conversational bricks about homelessness in general, homelessness as it relates to health, both at the individual and societal level, which has obviously been the impetus for what you've achieved and done.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you so much for having me, and it's an absolute honour. And it's just a shame that I couldn't be there in person. And despite always saying that Melbourne is the inferior state to Sydney, I would have loved to be there in person. Homelessness health is an area that I never thought I would never envisioned my career path or personal trajectory going down. But when I was enlightened to, I guess, the health inequality and the challenges limiting access to healthcare, it was hard not to want to do something about it. I guess to lay a few of those foundational pillars, I'd been volunteering for a food service for many years and was familiar with homelessness. And at least in my mind, but I certainly think in society's mind, we always, when we think of homelessness, think of shelter and food, but we rarely think about their healthcare and the uniqueness of healthcare delivery in that population. But I had an encounter in London with someone who was having a seizure that, as a result of that encounter, I did a lot more research and I learned that there were a number of significant and challenging barriers that limited access to healthcare. And they're fairly straightforward barriers. But as a result of those barriers, the health outcomes for those experiencing homelessness were far worse. And that was predominantly because conditions were being left untreated for many, many years until they had wreaked havoc, or people failed to present to hospitals or GP centres. And so we decided to set up Streetside Medics, which is a mobile GP-led medical service. We have a team of doctors, nurses, allied health professionals and volunteers that go out every single night, currently across New South Wales. And they deliver healthcare to those experiencing homelessness out of the van in collaboration with food services. And it's opportunistic medicine at its best. It's being at the right place at the right time with a service that alleviates a lot of those barriers.
And before we talk specifically about Streetside Medics and what's in those fabulous looking vans, root cause of homelessness in a rich country, rich cities, we kind of have a good idea what possibly, leads to it. But I'd love to hear your opinions.
Yeah, I think we have some ideas, but the one thing I've learned in the 2 years that I've been, part of Streetside Medics and in the years of volunteering was how little I know, and how we tried to simplify some very complex situations, but at the end of the day, it is such a complex situation that's hard to understand. And that's evidenced by the fact that we're in Australia in the 21st century and we've still got people living on the streets of our cities. But some of the core pillars and some of the core reasons that we know include mental health, substance abuse, sort of family trauma, and trauma in any form can certainly lead to it. And we see people that have PTSD from wars, from relationships, from traumatic situations. We know, and there's data that's published, that people can experience homelessness as a result of medical issues, and certainly that's one of the reasons they stay in homelessness, and mental health and issues surrounding that. So probably the main pillars that we see in our population, but certainly that's published widely.
So take us through Streetside Medics. You've told us a little bit about, like the heart of what you want to do, but that very first spark of the idea that you could actually make this particular thing happen, this specific service happen, and how you went about that, and perhaps even some of the barriers that you faced in setting it up. Yeah.
So the experience, in short, was a gentleman was having a seizure in Waterloo, just across Waterloo Station in London, where I was a final year medical student doing a clinical elective at the Imperial College. And I had a conversation with some of his friends that had surrounded him and learned that he had seizures for many months, but failed to present to a hospital because he thought that the healthcare system would care for him or wouldn't take him as seriously as the other average person in society. And the lady that was telling me this, I presume, would have had sort of she had bloody diarrhea and severe abdominal pain for years. So I assume it was an IBD, sort of ulcerative colitis condition, but had failed to present because one time she did and someone said something nasty to her. And that really sat on my chest for a while, thinking, what could this guy have? I mean, he could have a tumor, he could have epilepsy, he could have so many different things. I wonder what it is and why has he not gone and presented. And so when I came back to Australia and did my research, I referenced those barriers, and they're straightforward barriers that was evident in research. And the lack of transportation, a lack of awareness, the costs that prohibit them from going, the need for Medicare and ID and sort of formal documentation, the structured appointment system schedule. So, you need to be at this place at this time between these hours for a certain duration at a certain period of time. That makes it challenging. Stigma and embarrassment is a big part of it. I mean, I couldn't imagine experiencing homelessness and then trying to sit in the waiting room in Sydney CBD to see a GP, and how challenging that might be, and distrust in the practitioner. But certainly one that I always advocate for is health priority. At any one point in time, someone experiencing homelessness seems to be more focused about where am I sleeping and what's my shelter and what's my security and companionship, but not why are my legs a little bit more swollen than normal, or why am I a bit more short of breath, or why has my stool turned black, and questions like that. So health priority is a big part of it. I was at this stage a final year medical student and soon to become an intern, and didn't have too much savings, but managed to buy a van. And then I had a friend and someone that I knew that really believed in the idea and supported it strongly. And so were able to get funds to fit out the van, but obviously recognised we needed to register the organisation as a charity, and that was very expensive. So I used my sort of Middle Eastern negotiation tactics and managed to convince a large law firm in Sydney CBD, Clayton Youths, to take us on pro bono and set us up as a charity, and then convinced some other corporate partners to get along. So we got some medical equipment donated, then we got Mercedes-Benz involved and LSH Auto, and they certainly assisted with the rolling out of the van. And then it was a very small team. It was really just myself and a friend of mine who's a GP that started the service with a board of directors, including Professor Ravinay Bindi as the head of cardiology at Royal North Shore, and TAVI coordinator Alexandra Bayer, and then there were a couple of business people. And we rolled out the service, and then slowly some friends and family got involved. A friend, Brendan Miles, who's quick care inclined, and I think he just got the scheme job on anaesthetics. He was one of the first few volunteers, and a number of people at work started volunteering, and then it just kept growing, and it went from one clinic to 4 clinics, and then 4 to 8, and then it went from 20 volunteers to 50 to 200, and now we've got sort of hundreds of volunteers on our books, and the service has grown to be essentially sort of every day now.
Was there nothing there beforehand, before you started?
There was no model like Streetside Medics, and what I mean by that is there were health services, obviously hospitals and GPs. There are services that are city specific, and they're predominantly a nurse-run model, which is great, but has limitations in the sense of care plans and starting therapy for complex conditions like hepatitis C or heart failure. So there was no GP-led initiative. There was no truly mobile initiative that was in multiple locations. And what I experienced when I was sort of doing my research was there were services where, let's say, a health practitioner would go and check someone's blood pressure in the community, let's say on sort of street side, and would say, you have high blood pressure, you need to come into our clinic and get that checked, or they don't go. Or you have high blood pressure and you need to get started on medication and you need to come and see the GP, or they don't go. And that's why our model is GP-led, because not only can we start treatment, diagnose and start treatment and manage conditions that we find, but we can do GP care plans, we can do diabetic care plans, mental health care plans, chronic care plans, which enables them to access the healthcare system that we all take advantage of, and the subspecialties and allied health professionals that they inevitably end up needing.
And that's answering some of my next question. What can you actually do? What can you provide from the van? What is it? How is it kitted out? And what do you feel is the limit of what you're able to do?
Yeah, so the van is pretty well decked out. So there's 2 stations, an MSO station and a GP station, MSO being a medical support officer. And that's generally a junior doctor who can take a bit of a history, triage them, take their vitals, take some bloods if they need it, and whether they have Medicare or not. Or actually, none of our patients need Medicare. If they have Medicare or not, they get blood tests done if they need it. And then if they need a vaccine, we've got a vaccine fridge and can obviously vaccinate them. And we did a number of COVID vaccines when sort of COVID was really ramping up in 2020 and 21. And then in the van, we've got an ultrasound, an ECG machine, a spirometry machine, in GP stuff, dermatoscope, otoscope, ophthalmoscope. And so that allows us to pick up a number of things. And we've also got some point of care testing, so we can do a HbA1c, a full blood count, a VBG, EUCs, INR, all within the van. So that means that sort of your diagnostic capability is quite broad, and you can pick up on a number of things from within the van. But we've also got a strong internal referral network of subspecialties and allied health professionals that we can refer to, that we have an agreement where they'll see our patients free of charge within somewhat of a sort of reasonable time frame. And we can ensure that collaboration with subspecialties and tertiary hospitals. We refer patients to hospitals and sort of other community health providers.
This session in Coda is very much about the individual patient and how that the intersectionality between an individual's health and the clinical context, and whether that's their individual patient story or a greater societal, the greater societal issues. Any particular individual clinical cases come to mind, either perhaps people that may well have come to very significant harm if they were not seen by you or were having to navigate the traditional systems, or perhaps even, I know that your basic physician training, that with a cardiology bent, maybe cardiology adjacent, we can call you now, and how that perhaps influences, management of an individual patient, homelessness in a cardiology setting?
Yeah. So regarding the first point that you raised, sort of the uniqueness of an individual situation in the story, I mean, one certainly comes to mind. Actually, two do. One of them was a young guy who came to us asking for some dressings. And Callum, who's an ED registrar, was working the shift, a good friend of mine. And he asked why. And he goes, I've got an ulcer on my leg. And so he goes, do you mind if I have a look at it? And he showed him this ulcer. And it was a pretty nasty sort of arterial-looking ulcer that would be quite rare for a 26-year-old to have. And so asked some more questions and got some vitals and very quickly realized that he had type 1 diabetes. His blood sugar was 30, so like significantly raised. And on digging further, had not been able to access insulin for at least a few years due to being unable to afford it. And his unique situation was that when he was 13 years old, so he'd been homeless for 13 years, he had experienced his mother or had witnessed his mother being beat up by his father. And whilst that was happening, he was locked up in a room. And that inability to help his mum and sort of being trapped in that room meant that he had a severe phobia of being indoors. And he'd been homeless very shortly after experiencing that, but he had a severe phobia of being indoors. And a big part of him not going to hospitals and not going to medical centres or specialty centres is because he had that fear of being indoors. It would cause him severe anxiety. And I guess the uniqueness of the van setting meant that he could sit in the van but still be outside and see the outside and have easy access to being outside, and felt a significant sense of peace being in a setting that he was more comfortable with, i.e. being Woolloomooloo, the corner of Burke and Cathedral Street, where he goes for food every week, but in a van where he can literally see the street outside him, and being able to provide him insulin, get an endocrinologist to come and see him in person and provide that care. We haven't completely won with him, and there's a long way to go, but certainly his life is in a different trajectory than what it was when he first came and saw us.
Yeah, it's very impressive. It's been marvellous to see that this progress from that spark of idea to what you've achieved. What about engaging the medical establishment, your colleagues, the big ivory towers, quite ivory towers. The one I was more like crumbling concrete, but still, they're still big buildings with their big sort of systems and processes that are very, very difficult to navigate for people who are marginalised, such as people with homelessness. How do we engage the bigger medical community? What can we do?
Yeah, I think a few things. I mean, I certainly have had to develop thick skin from people who potentially didn't believe in the idea or didn't think that it would work or saw limitations with it, which, I mean, surely there are limitations, but it's addressing the need. But to my surprise and real pleasure, most local health districts, if not all, primary healthcare networks, these well-established organisations have taken us with open arms and do anything and everything to support us. And the model that we've got at Northern Sydney Local Health District now is interesting and works very well, where we have a local health district nurse, a community nurse employed by the district, who join us at every single clinic within that district and ensure that we have referral to subspecialties, clinics, and community providers by means of the fact that they're there. And so that makes sure that we're a community program that is well linked in with the local health district and can access services. And we can alleviate a lot of the barriers that are quite challenging, and certainly the most challenging at the moment is mental health and psychiatry, but overall it's challenging to access services in a large tertiary hospital where the healthcare system at the moment is really under pressure and is significantly stressed, and is probably not going to get better anytime soon.
Yeah. So what's next for Daniel? Obviously, you've Young Australian of the Year. How has that impacted your sort of your dream, your vision, and where do you see this going when that year's over and the spotlight's kind of turned on someone else?
Yeah, I mean, I'm excited for that. Look, it's been an amazing year, and it's been a big responsibility trying to advocate for what I believe in and advocating to have homelessness health be put on the agenda when we talk about homelessness. And it's something I'll continue to do beyond this year and probably for the rest of my life. I mean, I believe in Streetside Medics more than anything. And I have sort of actively been a strong part of Streetside Medics, but Streetside Medics is growing in its own at the moment, independent of me. It has a sort of great support network and an amazing board and a good CEO and volunteers. So the organisation will and should continue to grow. So that not a single person in Australia experiences access to homelessness. We'll be launching in Melbourne in the next few months, and then continue to expand across Australia so that no one has limited access to healthcare.
In Perth, where I'm from, we do have a homeless healthcare service. It's actually pretty amazing. But I can see that possibly one of the risks is having these sorts of services where they're pretty much run by the quiet heroes, that there's people going above and beyond, doing their own thing. It's kind of a splintered system in a way. It'd be wonderful to get to have something that was nationalised and well funded, but then I guess that becomes a big bureaucracy, and then it falls down the wayside of.
And I think you raise a good point. I mean, it's and that's the other thing that I've been advocating for. There are a number of amazing organisations that are doing amazing work but are working in silo, and there needs to be some way of coordinating care and collaborating with existing services and working within the healthcare system. So the whole point of Streetside Medics is not to become a healthcare system, and it's certainly not to become a medical centre either. It's to become valuable to patients, but then inevitably to become redundant because we link them in with healthcare providers who can continue care beyond what we do. And our role is just to be that bridge between I don't see a doctor, haven't seen one in 10 years, to I have a GP and a hospital and a sort of a healthcare system that I know how and when and can access.
And my last question is measuring impact and outcomes. Where does that sit? How do you measure the impact apart from the intuitive and the obvious?
So I mean we do a lot of research and data and objectivity, but for me it's on the ground. Like that's the impact for me. A lot of the impact can't be recorded on paper. When we see someone that hasn't seen a GP in years, or we fix something that has gone neglected for years, that's the impact. Just individualistic for me. That one person that has come and seen you, that is grateful that you were there, that genuinely appreciates it, that feels better as a result of it, that makes it all worth it. And I think I've always been focused on each clinic, one person at a time.
And that I think brings us nicely to the end of the conversation, because that is exactly what we're talking about in this session. It's the individual, a single patient, measuring big population outcomes, great, very important. However, it is the single journey of a single patient that matters. And so, Daniel, thank you so very much for your time and what you're doing. Very impressive. And hopefully we'll be able to have some Twitter questions and some reflection, but you'll be off doing other things, so you won't hear us. So thank you very much for your time.